Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 8 of the fantasy season. It is bye Mageddon 2025, ladies and gentlemen. The following teams are on bye: the Cardinals, Lions, Jags, Raiders, Rams, Seahawks, meaning you will have no Marvin Harrison, Amon-Ra, Jameson, as if that mattered, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, and Jackson Smith and Himba. Okay? These guys are not available. But don't worry, I'm going to go through every matchup that we have this week. You will have my rankings for every player. If you want to pause the screen and go to a specific time code, you can. There are time codes down below as well in the description. And I am guaranteeing a reply to the first 3 comments of every video this year. So make sure you're subscribed and you've turned your notifications on. Let's start with the Vikings side of the ball. Keep in mind that these are 2 defenses that don't give up a lot of points to fantasy wide receivers, typically, at least over the course of the year. Regardless, there are a ton of players that we're going to start this week. And I want you guys to understand that because there are so many buys and so many injuries, we're going to be much more open to starting a lot of players this week than we are in previous videos. Justin Jefferson, a must start. Jordan Addison, my wide receiver 23, honestly, he should be labeled a must start as well. Here's what I'll say. If Carson Wentz is the quarterback, then Jordan Addison is a must start. Last week with Carson Wentz playing, Jordan Addison had 12 targets, more than Justin Jefferson. He ended up with 128 receiving yards. Obviously, Jefferson still had a fine day, 5 catches, 79 yards. Right now, what's really frustrating if you own Justin Jefferson is you don't feel like you've got that elite name at the moment. Now, J.J. McCarthy is limited in practice with the ankle. We'll see if he actually plays in week number 9. It's not like Carson Wentz has been balling out and he's irreplaceable. When J.J. McCarthy is healthy, he will be playing for this team. And I'll be honest, if it is J.J. McCarthy, I would lower my expectations for these names just because we have a rookie quarterback, going to Los Angeles on prime time. I would lower my expectations for what he's capable of doing in his, was it second, third start in the NFL. On the opposite side of the ball, here's what I will say. One of these names, they will not do well this week, okay? Between all of the Ladd McConkeys, the Keenan Allens, the Quentin Johnstons, one of these names, they will not do well. But that is the nature of the Los Angeles Chargers receiving room. There are so many receivers, and they can't all be successful every single week, but they're all very talented names. Keenan Allen this week had 29 fantasy points. I wouldn't anticipate that being something that happens every single week. There will be plenty of weeks where Quentin Johnson steps up and, he's the one that actually pops off for fantasy football. Ladd McConkey will probably end up being the most consistent on a week-to-week basis. But either way, it's like me telling you, you have to start them to get the upside, like a Jameson Williams. It's like me telling you, you have to start Jameson Williams. Here's the difference. There's actually upside. And Justin Herbert actually looks towards these receivers to involve them in the offense. So yes, I'm aware that things could go sideways, but you got to play these guys if they're available for you this week, especially with all the buys that we have right now. Okay, let's go to start of the 1 p.m. Sunday slate of game. No international games this week. We've got the Dolphins at the Falcons, 45.5 point over under. The Falcons are favored by 7.5 points. For Miami, the Dolphins are not going to change their coaching staff at this time. At least that's what they're telling me at the time of recording this video. I would be shocked if McDaniel is still the head coach in the next 10 days for this team. That also means that Tua Tagovailoa is still the starting quarterback, and Darren Waller, if you are curious, is not available. Why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because Jalen Waddle, there are plenty of reasons to start him this week. It's not a great matchup, but with no Tyreek Hill, no Darren Waller, they're going to have to force feed both Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle, so he's definitely a startable name in a matchup where the Falcons are favored. The Dolphins are likely going to need to throw the ball the entire game. That's why I think Waddle is a playable name. On the opposite side of the ball, Michael Penix is dealing with a bone bruise in his foot and ankle. He is day-to-day. That doesn't really change the way I rank a Drake London, a Darnell Mooney, because if Michael Penix isn't available, then we will have Kirk Cousins. So there won't be that big of a gap as far as what a quarterback can do for these receivers in fantasy football. So Drake London, I know it was a disappointing game last week. I'm looking for him to bounce back. He still had 10 targets. He's still coming off a couple weeks before that where he had over 30 fantasy points. Put him into your lineups. Darnell Mooney is not a bad dart throw, though, if you're in a desperate situation. I really think there are worse dart throws than Darnell Mooney. The last game, he had 5 targets, but he's always being targeted downfield. So he had 5 targets, but caught 3 of them for 68 yards. He's typically the one that's being targeted downfield. And if there is any sort of long touchdown, he's always in play. Okay, let's go to the Bears at the Ravens. High over under 49.5 points. The Ravens are heavy favorites in this game. And obviously, that's because it's in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson should be back this game. That means Zay Flowers is officially in play. It's a decent matchup against the Bears. The Bears are a top 10 matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. I wouldn't call Zay Flowers some must start. There are plenty of games where he's just completely irrelevant, but I do believe the Bears are competent enough to make this an interesting game. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, if the Ravens are going to win this game, which is what Vegas thinks, and if they're going to do it easily by about 6.5 points, then that should mean a great day for the receivers in Chicago, specifically Rome Odunze. I would anticipate Rome Odunze having a huge bounce back here in week number 8. The Ravens are the second best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Obviously, like we said, the Bears are anticipated to be down in this game. I think he has a huge bounce back. DJ Moore is a spot start at best, and unfortunately, until further notice, the Bears are not going to feature Luther Burden. They're still going to have Olamide Zaccheaus as the more utilized player in this receiver room. Why? I don't know. I don't understand it either. I don't know why these coaching staff decide to make the decisions that they make, right? It's confusing to you. It's confusing to me. But Zaccheaus is still playing ahead of Burden, and until that changes, you can't play Burden or Zaccheaus. Okay, let's go to the Bills at the Panthers here. High over under 47.5 points. The Bills are heavy favorites. To me, this game has all of the ingredients for a terrible game for the Buffalo Bill receivers. It's really like playing Russian roulette with this receiver room, right? You're saying, oh, maybe this week I'll bet on Khalil Shakir. Russian roulette and you get shot, right? Except there's no bullet in the chamber. Keon Coleman, right? It's like maybe Keon will get into the end zone. Josh Palmer might be irrelevant. Oh, well, actually, their third string tight end was the one who caught the touchdown. And typically, the Bills receivers are important in games where they're down. I don't project the Bills to be down in this game. Not against the Carolina Panthers. They're 7.5 point favorites. So in my humble opinion, I don't think you want to start many Bills receivers. Shakir is the safest floor if you're going to do that. And by the way, it's the third worst matchup for your fantasy wide receivers anyway. So most teams attack the Panthers on the ground defensively. Okay, for the Panthers side of the ball, though, things are going to look a little bit different in week 8. First off, Bryce Young will not play. He has the ankle sprain. It will be Andy Dalton. And personally, as a Tetairoa McMillan owner, I'm really excited to see Andy Dalton in this offense. We've seen Andy Dalton like the Jameis Winstons of the world, the Joe Flaccos of the world. When they're down, you can trust Andy Dalton to sit back in the pocket and just fling it, right? Of course, he can throw an interception, but he can also make an incredible play. So I'm really excited about Tetairoa McMillan in this game. I do believe that the Panthers will be down, and he'll have plenty of opportunities to shine. For Leggett, he's a Hail Mary play at best. I know he had 10 targets last week. Maybe that carries over with Andy Dalton, but I would not project that from one week to the next. He's had plenty of bust games this year. Okay, let's go to the Jets at the Bengals. 44.5 point over under. The Bengals are favored. No surprise there. Aaron Glenn, at the time of recording this video, hasn't decided on a quarterback. Honestly, when you guys find out, it's not going to change my rankings, okay? If it's Tyrod Taylor, if it's Justin Fields, it's just not going to change the way I view this wide receiver room. It's very simple. If Garrett Wilson is healthy, and they're hopeful he plays in week 8, if he's healthy and ready to go, you play Garrett Wilson. Doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. If Garrett Wilson is not healthy, you stay away from this wide receiver room entirely. I don't care that it's the Bengals. I'm not going to start any of the other wide receivers. Now, for the Cincinnati Bengals, Jamar Chase, of course, is going to be a must start. What we saw on Thursday night was genuinely insane. Genuinely insane. Like 23 targets for Jamar Chase. He's my wide receiver 1 this week. You can't sit a guy where they've got a veteran gunslinger in Joe Flacco, where every time he steps back, he's like, where the hell is Jamar? There he is. Here's the ball, Jamar Chase, right? So, of course, you have to start him. T. Higgins is a fine play as well. Now that, they're deciding to just air the ball out each and every play. He had a fine day last week as well with 21.6 fantasy points. On to the 49ers at the Texans. It's a 42.5 point over under. At the time of recording, the Texans are favored, but I would be shocked if that doesn't swing in favor of the 49ers over the course of the next couple of days. So here's the deal for the 49ers, by the way. Mac Jones is going to start. They said it's a reach for Brock Purdy in week number 8. So they want to make sure he's fully healthy. They trust Mac Jones. So it will be Mac Jones. Unfortunately for all of the Kendrick Bourne people out there, this was my concern with Kendrick Bourne. Just, he's a good player, but there's going to be plenty of names for them to spread the ball out in this offense, and it's just not going to be consistent from one week to the next. Kendrick Bourne in this game had just 2 targets. The hot streak is over, 14 yards. Juwan Jennings was the most targeted player in this offense. Now, I don't project Ricky Pearsall to be back, but I'm ranking all these guys as if Ricky Pearsall is back, and it's just too messy, man. Like, I would call all of them, Jennings, Bourne, Pearsall, they're all risky plays at best. It's not a good matchup against the Texans for wide receivers. There's too many mouths to feed. George Kittle is going to get more opportunities. CMC is always going to demand targets. So picking between these names is, again, a little bit like Russian roulette. You know, one of these names is probably going to have a fine day. I don't think it's very predictable. So the vast majority of you watching this, 9 out of 10 people, I think you have a better option than one of these Niner receivers this week. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Nico Collins is a must start if he's healthy. Now, why am I saying that? Well, he left Monday Night Football's game with a concussion. He didn't come back. However, same thing happened with Marvin Harrison previously last week, where he left the game with a concussion and then he still played the following week. So if Nico Collins is healthy, he's the only name I trust in this matchup. But if Nico Collins and Christian Kirk are out, then there are some really fun Hail Mary plays to consider. For example, Jalen Knoll is one of those Hail Mary plays that I do think that we should consider this week. He was the receiver that built some chemistry with CJ Stroud in the absence of both Christian Kirk and Nico Collins on Monday Night Football. We saw 7 targets for Jalen Knoll, right? 7 targets. He turned those 7 targets into 77 yards. Jaden Higgins had 3 targets, but he was never on the same page, unfortunately, with CJ Stroud. Xavier Hutchinson is going to get plenty of opportunities, but if I'm going to trust anyone, again, if Nico and Kirk are out, then it's going to be Knoll, and then followed by Knoll, it would be Jaden Higgins, just because I believe at some point they're going to have to unleash these rookie wide receivers. Guys, news is constantly changing in the NFL. If you want my latest rankings for both weekly and rest of season, then become a season pass member, but make sure you use the promo code LAND at signup. When you do, it'll be a $34 one-time purchase. You get some vouchers to come on the live stream and ask me questions about your fantasy team. You get all the latest rankings, all the premium tools like the trade calculator, and of course, you're supporting the show here, keeping the lights on. Check that out in the pinned comment. Okay, let's go to the Browns at the Patriots. Very low over-under, one of the lowest of the week. Pats are heavy favorites by 7 points. I'll be honest, I don't think there are many good fantasy options in this game. And let me explain. For the Cleveland Browns, I don't think it would matter if Jerry Jeudy had 10 targets per game. I'm not sure he would ever finish top 24 in fantasy football, right? I mean, he's consistently getting targets, and even though last week was a little bit of a down week because of the weather, and it's not really turning into anything. So both Jerry Jeudy, Isaiah Bond, I don't trust. It doesn't matter if this team is down multiple scores. Just the quarterback play isn't there. They're not, playing up to their potential. It's just you have a better option, I promise you. And then on the opposite side of the ball, sure, things could go well for Stephon Diggs this week, but think about the game plan for the Pats in this game. Against the Cleveland Browns, they're heavy favorites. If they are actually favorites in this game, then at least I would be shocked if they're heavily targeting their receivers in the second half. And let's be honest, these receivers are not getting enough targets to rely on week in, week out anyway. Kayshon Boutte last week had 5 catches. This week, just 2 targets. Now, yes, he ended up getting into the end zone. That's great for Boutte, right? He ended up having 2 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Great, but that's not sticky from one week to the next, right? Names like Stephon Diggs, 7 targets this week, had a safe floor. That's why if you're going to start any of them, he's the safest floor. Some weeks, Demario Douglas is involved. Then they see Mac Hollins and Hunter Henry. And, in a game where I don't think the Patriots are going to need to throw the ball much, I would prefer not to start these names, but Diggs is the guy I would trust if you have to. Okay, let's go to the Giants at the Eagles. Wan'Dale Robinson is really becoming a must start. He's a spot start for me. I just don't think he has the same upside as the must starts this week, but he's really becoming like a must start. 10 targets last week versus the Denver Broncos. Now, you can't rely on that type of game flow each and every week where both offenses are just throwing the ball every minute of the game. But last week, with those 10 targets, he got 6 of them, 95 yards, 15.5 fantasy points. He's been a consistent receiver for Jackson Dart, the only reliable receiver for Jackson Dart. Now, little Jordan Humphreys, I think there are worse Hail Mary plays out there, And by the way, if Darius Slayton is healthy, replace Little Jordan Humphrey with Darius Slayton in my rankings. But either way, the outside receiver, there is a Hail Mary play here. Last time Little Jordan Humphrey played the Eagles 2 weeks ago, he had 8 targets. So that's kind of the, they should be down in the game. That's the reason you might play him in a desperate position. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, because there are so many injuries and so many buys, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, they got to be into your lineups, right? Finally, we're seeing the Eagles offense, specifically the passing attack, really starting to fire on all cylinders. Last week, the Eagles in Minnesota just completely lit up that defense, even though that defense was the best defense against wide receivers. You can see Devonta Smith, 33.3 points, 183 yards and a touchdown. Elite performance. A.J. Brown got into the end zone twice. Great performance for him. 28 fantasy points. Now, of course, there is some volatility with these receivers. Some weeks the run game will be featured. Some weeks it'll be the receivers, but it's a good matchup against the Giants. They give up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers, so I'm going to put them into my lineups personally. Okay, let's jump to the Bucks at the Saints. This is the start of the afternoon slate of games. It's a very high over-under at 47.5 points. The Bucks are favored by 6.5 points. But look, we have to have a moment of silence for Mike Evans. If you're just finding out, then I hate to be the first to tell you, but Mike Evans suffered a broken clavicle and he will miss most of the season. They're saying 6 to 8 weeks, but for the most of the fantasy season, he's not going to be a relevant name whatsoever. That's really hard to hear, and we never want to see a player injured. However, the impact of the Mike Evans situation is going to be positive in fantasy for both Emeka Egbuka as well as Tez Johnson. Okay, so the way I'm ranking these receivers is as if Chris Godwin is not available. So Emeka Egbuka, a must start. And then Tez Johnson, Tez Johnson becomes a legitimate flex in this scenario where we have no Mike Evans, right? Tez Johnson, I kind of compared him to Tank Dell coming out of college. He's really, undersized, but a great route runner and can get open consistently and also consistently down the field, which is what this Bucs offense really loves. He had 7 targets last week without Mike Evans. He turned those 7 targets into 58 yards and a touchdown. Could have had another touchdown, but Baker Mayfield, out of character, overthrew him in the back of the end zone. So I do think he's going to be a consistent flex play moving forward. He's actually a great waiver wire pickup as well if he's out there for some reason. But look, if Godwin is active, then Godwin I would prefer to start over Tez Johnson, and Tez becomes a really risky start. Sterling and Cameron also become must sits. On the opposite side of the ball, Chris Olave has been one of the most consistent receivers in fantasy football, one of the best values in fantasy football drafts. My wide receiver 10 this week, another game where the Saints should be down, should need to throw the ball, and that should benefit Chris Olave. Now, of course, for Rashid Shaheed, you can never really project it. He's basically Jameson Williams on a worse offense, but he might be utilized more. But yeah, Rashid Shaheed is a touchdown or bust type of player. I don't think you should rely on him. Okay, let's go to the Cowboys at the Broncos. One of the higher over-unders of the week. Understandably so. Anytime the Cowboys are involved in a matchup, there should be a lot of fantasy points. The Broncos are favored by 3 points, and that's a really good sign for this offense for fantasy football. Now, Dak Prescott is on an absolute tear, ladies and gentlemen. He has now thrown 3 touchdowns without an interception in 4 consecutive games. The only other quarterbacks to do that, Russell Wilson in 2015, Drew Brees in 2019, Aaron Rodgers in 2014, and Peyton Manning as well as Tom Brady. So he's on a real heater right now. I know this is a bad matchup against the Broncos, but again, sometimes elite offenses, it just doesn't matter what defense they're facing. You're going to put them into your lineup each and every week. So CeeDee Lamb, who gets worked inside, outside, I am going to go ahead and tell you that you've got to start him. Okay, there's no chance you're sitting him. Yes, it could go sideways, but you're going to put CeeDee Lamb into your lineup. George Pickens is a little bit more scary for me because he obviously plays more of the boundary role and Pat Surtain might be shadowing him. But still, in such a high-powered offense, in a game where this elite offense is projected to be down, you just can't sit these top receivers. On the opposite side of the ball, one of my favorite plays this entire week is Courtland Sutton. The Cowboys are the best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. He's my wide receiver 7 this week. He should have a fantastic day. Him and Bo Nix should be on the same page. And then Troy Franklin is a decent Hail Mary play as well. He had 10 targets last week. I know the touchdown was a fluke as well, but this is a game where they're going to need Troy Franklin to make a difference. So I do think he's not the worst Hail Mary play if you're in a really desperate spot. Okay, let's go to the Titans at the Colts. Now, for the Titans, it's technically a good matchup, right? The Colts are the 5th best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. The Colts are also heavy favorites, 14.5 points. That would indicate to us that the Titans are going to need to throw the ball for the majority of the game. But between Alec Manor and Chimere DK, I just don't know who you can really trust. So sure, if you're out there in a 16-team league and it's a start 10 lineup, you can put one of these guys in there. But they're both more stashes than they are plays at this point. But one of them is going to have a good game. I just couldn't tell you who. On the opposite side of the ball, Michael Pittman is the only player that I really trust in this wide receiver room. Now, obviously, if Josh Downs is out this week, then Alec Pierce would get a bump and he would be a much more reliable spot start, a flexible name coming off a good, fantasy day. But if Josh Downs is healthy, there'll just be too many mouths to feed for me to trust both him and Alec Pierce in a game where it's probably a Jonathan Taylor game where they probably don't need to throw the ball very much. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Okay, let's go to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Packers at the Steelers, 44.5 point over under. The Packers are favored by 3 points. DK Metcalf, the only name that you can start for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's going to be inevitably boom bust games because Arthur Smith in this offense, they love to spread the ball out to a bunch of different names, including their tight end 1, 2, and 3. But DK Metcalf, still a must start each and every week with the upside he has with Aaron Rodgers. On the opposite side of the ball, I do think this will be a competitive game. And I do think both Romeo Doubs and Matthew Golden are decent starts. The Steelers are the 3rd best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. And Doubs and Golden have been the most consistent plays so far this year. Before we get into Monday Night Football, I want to tell you guys about 6 players I have the ultimate confidence in for week number 8. I've created a DFS lineup with them. We're talking Courtland Sutton at the Dallas Cowboys. That should be juicy. I know things don't always work out, but that should be massive. I think Derrick Henry has a huge bounce back against the Bears. Scatterboo is just so reliable on the ground through the air. Breece Hall, I want to get a little unique with my lineup. I don't think many people are high on Breece Hall, but he faces the Bengals this week. I love that matchup. Odunze should bounce back against the Ravens, and Egbuka with no Mike Evans should be a solid play in week 8. You can create your own lineup simply by downloading the FastDraft app. Use my promo code LAND. I'll match your deposit up to $50, and then you'll get my week 8 rankings completely free. You can check that out in the pinned comment if you want to have some fun. Okay, let's go to Monday Night Football. Obviously, a lot of this game depends on Jaden Daniels. MRI showed no long-term issues, but that still doesn't mean he'll play this week versus the Chiefs. If he plays, obviously that's a huge boost to Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, and those type of names. It's a high over-under, by the way, 48.5 points. The Chiefs are favored by about 10 points. That line will get larger if there's no Jaden Daniels. But what you're seeing in my rankings is as if Jaden Daniels plays. So Deebo's a top 20 play. Terry McLaurin is a flexible name. But if Terry McLaurin is out, I don't care who the quarterback is. You can start Deebo Samuel if he's out there and he's playing. In the event that Terry McLaurin is out, Deebo Samuel is out, and Jaden Daniels is out, I don't want to mess around with these wide receivers. There's no value whatsoever. I'm not messing around with it. Okay? I think that covers all of our bases. Now, let's go to the Chiefs side of the ball. Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice. It was awesome to see them both on the field this last weekend. Rashee Rice, one of our favorite buys in Dynasty football this offseason. And clearly, they were intentional about featuring him in this game. He played under 50% of the snaps, yet he had 9 targets, and he turned those 9 targets into 2 touchdowns, 23 fantasy points, 7 catches, 42 yards. If you weren't convinced before this week that Rashee Rice was the alpha, you're probably convinced now. And Xavier Worthy basically turns in to what we hoped Jameson Williams was, right? A part of a great offense that will feature him as a deep threat in this passing attack. So both of them are must starts. The Commanders defense is absolutely terrible. And Hollywood Brown is, always a contender to get into the end zone. But guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button to show some love, subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. nothing but love. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.